Greetings. Welcome to Dr. English's Book Lovers Book Club. I'm Dr. English and I teach English. This week I'm going to review the book Dry by Neal and Jarrod Shusterman. This too was a book that I taught not in my teaching the graphic novel class, but in English 289, which was literature and language or literature and culture and social justice. They changed the name from conflict to social justice. And I chose to do the ecological crisis as my focus in teaching that sophomore level class. And one of the books I found in my investigation was Dry. And this is a book that I mean, if you're a Schusterman fan, you will like this, but I have to say, and I'll say this straight up, I even told my students this when I introduced the book, and I have to say the kids love this book. My sophomore students, mostly it was, freshman or entry level and then sophomore level, but I had a few people that were a little bit older who took this as an English elective, or I had a student who was in biology, which really, I was really pleased that she took the course because she was such a good student and had so many wonderful things to tell the English students, about sustainability and the environment. And I was so happy to have her, this is my shout out to her. And so the kids liked the book a lot. But I told them straight up, I don't like the ending. I hated the ending. I was like, no, this is the dumbest ending I've ever read in my entire life. And I'm probably being hyperbolic and exaggerating a little bit, but I did not like the ending of this book. I was like, why would you end a book like this? Because it was such a great climactic point in the whole thing. And then it was just like, the whole thing was anticlimactic because it's like, no, it's not realistic. So that part really upset me. But other than that, like you have Alyssa and you have Calton and their neighbors, and there's a tap out in California. They run out of water. And so I feel like what the Schustermans did with this to really show how that would really play out when people didn't have water, and to show like how human nature would take over pretty quickly. So Alyssa's family, she has a little brother named Garrett. Here's the other thing that was kind of unrealistic about this. Like at the very beginning there's a tap out. It's like an incredible emergency, and their parents disappear. I can't remember exactly like what they did, but they went off to do something, and then they're on their own with the neighbor Kelton, whose parents also, it's like they're there, but they're preppers, and so I need to point that out right off the bat. Like Calton is like a family who are preppers, so they have all this emergency water, they have all this emergency food, and Alyssa and Garrett are there, and Garrett makes a mistake of like they put a bunch of ice in the tub, and it was like he let all this water just it just they didn't get to use it. It was like a total, eighth grader, seventh grader. He's just a kid, mistake on his part. And so in the beginning of it, you realize that Calton's family has all this water, and other people in the neighborhood are coming to them and trying to get it. And so um, then then this is the beginning of their journey. Like they try to go and find the parents of Alyssa, and I'm saying that they could have just gone off. If I remember right, they just went off to go do something, and then there was a crisis in another area of the city, and that is why they go to try to find the parents, and Kelton goes with them. And really, it's like Kelton at first you just think, what a, just a typical prepper. They have weapons, all the whole bit. And Alyssa and her parents are not anything like that, and so they seem like an unlikely duo. But throughout the story, they meet up with another person. One of the characters I really like was Jackie. She's just a really and it's all told from a different perspective. So there's a shifting perspective of the narration. So if you don't like that, you probably won't like the book. But I actually like that because you hear Alyssa and then you hear Kelton, and then later Jackie is introduced, and Jackie is she has so much moxie, and I just really, really, really appreciate her character. And then there's Henry, who is nefarious in my personal opinion. You know that right away as a reader that okay, something's up with this dude. But the quest is always about water. I mean, like the sense of panic that people have. I think Schusterman's really captured that sense of panic that people have when they realize they don't have any water. And you're talking about the entire state of California. And so I think that in regard, I think if more people read this, they might actually really think more carefully about their use of water, and and how we care for the planet, and how the things that we are doing are affecting our amount of water. And it's a statistic is there's only 1% of all the water in the world that's drinkable. That's very low. That's 1%. That's a statistic that's been in existence for a very long time. And so I think if we started to think more about that, because I do believe this, we talked about in the 80s, the lack of oil, and what's the depletion of oil is going to be like on us. But, there's alternative ways to get energy. There's not alternative ways to get water. I do think there's like desalination plants in the Middle East, but they haven't had water for a long time. But it's very expensive. So, and the Middle East has all the oil and all the money, so they can do it. But for most of us, the big concern for the future is the, availability of water, because we already know people have died from lack of water and food on the African continent. And so I think that's just going to continue to get worse everywhere. So I think in some ways they do a really good job of making you understand this sense of panic that people have when they don't have water. And I maybe it's not even close to what it really could look like. So, but there's also moments in here where there are people that are being very community centered about rationing the water, and using it for if there's an emergency or something like that. But it's the sense of like you're all either going to stay afloat or you're all going to go down together. So I like that. So I like the way they develop Alyssa and Calton's character, and then add in this Jackie character who's phenomenal. And there are a couple of excerpts in this book that I read. We do a thing called Quaker reading. So instead of taking a quiz, we do a Quaker reading. I mean, I have all kinds of alternative ways to share books. A Socratic seminar, but a Quaker reading is still one of my all-time favorites. And that is where each person brings their book and they pick 2 or 3 excerpts, and then somebody starts reading aloud what they picked. And there's no comment, about, there's no critique of anybody's things. You just read it. And so it's a good way to to emulate the Quakers who would stand up at meetings and let the spirit move them, so to speak. And they would read passages, and people would just start reading whatever they had chosen as their text. And so there's this real sense of community about it, but also just it's very low stakes. There's no pressure. And to hear the book out loud has a profound power, in my personal opinion. And so even if someone didn't quite get all of the book done, they are going to hear a good majority of the main, most riveting parts, which I think, if they haven't delved into it, they can, which I know it's a sign, but sometimes people just have busy lives. So it's just a wonderful experience of hearing the words out loud, and feeling the emotion of it. And so there's a couple passages I always read because they're just so powerful. But I'm not going to read those because too many spoilers. Sorry. But I am going to read. This is from Kelton's point of view, and it's with his parents. And of course, his dad is kind of his dad, the king of preppers. So his character is well written. I really, thumbs up, 2 thumbs up to Jarrod and Neal for really getting a good depiction of the dad for Kelton's father. Okay, so Mom fills all of our glasses with water. It's more than we're supposed to have considering our rations. But it's not just that. She's filled our glasses to the brim so that you can't lift them without spilling some. Another sign that she's angry at my father. Dad takes his seat at his spot at the head of the table for the moment, oblivious to Mom's irritated overtures, and begins making incisions in his ham. The sound of scraping cutlery, the ticking clock, no one's talking, the tension so thick in the air you need a machete just to make it to the refrigerator and back. Finally, my father notices it. He looks at my mom, looks at me, then continues cutting. I try to lighten the mood with something positive. Is Brady coming? I ask anyone who will answer. Dad responds, we still can't get a hold of him. Brady's the older brother who's not at the house. So much for lightening things. I realize that Brady's lack of response is yet another trigger point of stress. Brady's never been good with phones or emails or any sort of communication at all. These days, he only gets in touch when he feels like it and only responds when he has to. I thought with the tap out that might change, but apparently not. We're going to wait for him, right? I ask. I mean, before we leave for the bug out. So they have this place called the bug out, and it's like their prepper, bunker, so to speak. And they're waiting for Brady, their older brother, to come to go to the bug out, so they could be safe there and have plenty of supplies. Dad chews intensely. We shouldn't stay here much longer, he says. You can see how things are already breaking down. Mom refills my half-drunk glass back to the absolute brim. Mary Beth, this water is supposed to last us, he finally says, pointing with his fork. Your son is thirsty, though I'm not really. Good. Being a little thirsty will remind us why we need to ration, he rebuts, his anger beginning to fill to the brim. We have plenty, Mom reminds him. And if we're not going to share it, we might as well drink it all ourselves until we burst. So I love that the mother is like, she's upset with the dad because they have neighbors who are in need. And I think this one in particular was a man who came because they had an infant and they needed water for for the formula. So she was pretty upset about that he rejected that. He said, no, you're not getting any of our water. So obviously I would say, yes, you should teach this book. In high school, I think it'd be great. I think this would be a good one for middle school too. There's a couple scenes that, they're not explicit, but I think that it would really be helpful and beneficial to, to have 7th and 8th graders kind of be aware of what's the possibility of a tap out. Definitely teach it at high school. I think if, definitely I've done it with, I did it with book clubs. Kids worked together and talked about it in groups. And you could do just, if you have an ecological crisis unit in your high school class, you could have several different books. This Dry, the Light Pirate I had reviewed earlier are all good choices for like book clubs or literature circles focused around books addressing the ecological crisis. I think that would be a lot of fun. If I could do that, I would do that if I was going back to teach high school. So thank you for joining me. Thank you. I'll see you next time. Bye.